Well, I don't know about you, but last week, if you were here, it was awesome. That was one of the best nights I've had at church, and we can't wait for our next baptism opportunity. If you're looking to get baptized, you haven't been baptized before, or even if you just want some more information about it, encourage you to go and sign up for that. You can go to theprojectyeg.com. There's probably a couple of ways on there. I know you can go to the bottom, go to quick links, and click on I want to get baptized. We'd love to either have that conversation with you or just sign you up for the next one, which will be coming up within the next month or so. We're going to nail that down exactly in the next week, and can't wait for that. We need to clarify something. We're not starting a campus at Denny's. That was April Fool's, and frankly, I'm disappointed in all of you that you fell for it. Now, I do know we kind of live on the obscure side here, so you're probably unfair to, some of the stuff that we do. You're like, well, that could be an April Fool's joke as well, so that's fine. But, right now, think about it. Like a campus at Denny's, it's a little crazy. So just to be clear, we're not starting a campus at Denny's yet. We'll see. Here's someone clapping for that. Was that a clap of like, yeah, maybe there will be a Denny's, or it's like, no, I thought that was terrible. I'm just thankful it's not actually happening. Let me tell you, I spent a lot of time at Denny's when I was your age. When I was in college, we would go to the Denny's in Mill Woods, me and my friends. Like, a paper would be due at 8:30 a.m., and it'd be like, hey, boys, we're meeting up at 1 o'clock at Denny's to start this paper or what? And we were there so often that the waitress there knew our orders by heart. She didn't even have to order. We just walk in, she's like, Grand Slam? Yeah, okay. Thanks, Sarah. Good to see you. Doing good? How are the kids? Good? Great. We got to know these people so well. I spent so much money. In my mind, it was like going 3 times a week to go spend $20 at Denny's didn't seem like a financially poor decision. It was. That wasn't a good way to spend your money. But when I was in college, I thought this was just a good way to hang out with my friends. And frankly, I started to rack up the credit card debt on that. And that's what I want to talk about right now. I want to tell you, listen, if you are in credit card debt or you have a credit card, maybe you're just getting your credit card. Can I tell you somebody who is recently just come out of the credit card debt that I kind of accumulated in my 20s? Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't as bad as some people. I always thought my whole life that my credit card was so bad. And I remember I went and talked to someone in their 40s. I'm like, I have a lot of debt. And I told them how much it was, and they looked at me like, Jeff, that's not a lot of debt. And I learned that debt is a problem worldwide. It's something that happens all the time. But let me tell you, credit card debt can be terrible. Debt in general can be this horrible thing that can crush you. You do not want to get into debt. It can be the difference between opportunity, between generosity. It's just this weight on your shoulders all the time. In fact, I remember a friend of mine, he was $100,000 in credit card debt before his 25th birthday. Just extravagant things, and small purchases. In his wedding, he put $70,000 of credit card. I don't even know how you get approved for that much debt on your credit card at that age, right? What are we thinking here? It's almost like the banks don't care about us. They just want to make money off of it. I'm just saying. It's scary. Now, he got to the point where he could only pay the interest. Now, if you don't know how a credit card works, you get a certain amount on there. Every month you have to pay a percentage of the interest minimum. If you don't pay the interest, then you are actually going to be come after by loan sharks. So I don't know if that's the right term for it. Not like people from the bank are going to show up and break your legs if you don't pay it, like the mafia, but you will get in trouble. They will, take the things that you own, foreclose on the things that you've bought, on the things you couldn't afford to begin with. And that's a huge issue. In fact, this friend of mine, and this is a terrifying thought for me, he got to the point where he could only pay off the interest, and just barely. So the amount of money he could pay, he could never pay off more than the little bit that was added. He was never actually making a dent in the debt that he had accumulated. And month after month, he'd pay off. The loan sharks aren't coming after him. He's not going to lose his car. He isn't going to have people coming after him. But the problem is he could never actually make a dent. And I just think about how hopeless that feels. Think about how just the weight of that every time you pay off, I paid off my bill, I paid the interest, I'm okay for another month, but in a month I'm going to have to put another $500 on this, another $1,000 on this. And that's a lot of money, but it's not even beginning to make an impact. It's not beginning to make me free of this debt that I've been carrying everywhere. And every time I buy anything, anytime I dream about home ownership, all of these things, I've got this weight in the back of my mind that I'm just paying off the interest. It's hopeless. I can't do anything about it. Imagine how trapped he felt. How would you feel? Imagine being under the weight of that much debt. What would your life be like? What would your daily feelings be towards just life, finances, future? I'd be hopeless. I want to talk about the first humans. They're called Adam and Eve, and if you've been in church for any amount of time, you've probably heard that. If you're new here, first time in church, welcome. The first humans in the Bible are referenced as Adam and Eve. Now, the beginning of the world was a lot different than right now. The plan for humanity that God set forth had really a different perspective, a different vibe than what we're dealing with here in 2023, Canada, rest of the world. The plan was actually just perfection. When God created humans, it was literally heaven on earth. They were in a place that was called the Garden of Eden. And this place was perfect. It was literally heaven on earth. There was no pain. There was no suffering. There was no sickness. There was nothing. It was great. There was no death. The intention, the original plan that God had for his kids, for his people, for his children, for us, was to live forever with him in paradise, in harmony with no sin, no pain, no suffering. It's a little different than now. The only thing that they weren't allowed to do, there was complete freedom in this space. The only thing they weren't allowed to do was there was one tree they weren't allowed to eat the fruit from. It said basically, hey, you got the whole world to hang out in. There's a tree over there, may look cool, just don't touch it. Don't eat it. No, bad. I don't know about you. I'd want to hang out and just kind of see what the tree's like, right? I'd be pretty tempted to just go over. It's like, hey, I'm just going to go kind of shimmy over and look at the tree. I'm not going to eat the fruit. I'm just going to kind of look at it. I'm just going to hang out around it. I just see what's up. I don't know about you, but I think that's humanity's kind of fatal flaw, right? We want what we can't have. And so that became the problem for the first humans. Because Satan, he tricked them, he tempted them, he went to them and told them, listen, you know what? If you go and eat this fruit, you will know the difference between good and evil. You'll become powerful like God. Because, they'd been living in perfection. There was no knowledge of sin. There was no knowledge of chaos. There was no knowledge of rebellion or disobedience. It was perfect. And that's a hard thing for us to understand because all we know is chaos. All we know is imperfection. All we know is rebellion. But the truth was, he wasn't lying. Because they went and they listened to him and they ate that fruit, and in that moment, sin entered the world. Suddenly, they knew the difference between good and bad. And while it was promised and projected to them as something that was good and they were going to have all this knowledge, it actually was their downfall. And suddenly, they were no longer free. They were drowning in sin. They were drowning in their rebellion. Suddenly, the perfection that existed, the original plan for humanity that God had, was no longer good. They were severed from their connection to God, their direct connection to God, walking through the Garden of Eden with him in person, one-on-one. And God, because he is perfect, because he is the opposite of sin, he cannot exist with sin. So our judgment was that we could no longer be with God. We could no longer have that connection with him. We were doomed, damned. We were broken. We were no longer allowed to be with him. And frankly, it was the end, and it should have been the end. If we got what we deserved, we would have in that moment just been wiped off the face of the earth. And in that moment, the truth is that what happened was death entered the earth. Death entered our world. We were supposed to live forever, but now we could not because we were different than God, because we had let sin, the disease, come into our hearts, into our souls, and God cannot exist with sin because he is the polar opposite of sin, so therefore he could not exist with us. Unfortunately, this wasn't just something that happened to the first humans. This is something that you and I have in us inherently. It's kind of a hard thing to understand because obviously it's not biological, but it is passed down person to person. Every person from that point on through history, every human born today, every baby, every kid, every adult, we have this sinful nature. We have this part of us that wants to do what is bad for us, even if we know it's bad for us. And you'd say, well, Jeff, I don't see that. Look around. Look around at the world around you. Think about your own life. Why is it so hard to not do the things that are bad for us? Why is it that we fall into substance abuse? Why is it that we fall into bad relationships? Why is it we do things even though we know it's not good? We're like, yeah, I'm still going to do that. Maybe it will be different this time. Maybe it's all good. And then we find ourselves in the same position. It's because we have this built into us. It's a wretchedness, a rottenness, a brokenness in our souls that has come from that original sin that we carry, every single human. It's like an addiction being passed down through generations. And that's a biological thing, right? Like if somebody has a addiction, this tendency to go towards an addiction, if you have an addiction to a substance, your kids will be kind of more attracted towards that. They'll be more likely to fall into that addiction, which is very sad. And that's probably the best metaphor I can use to explain how sin works. It's not like you're just automatically, a horrible person, but you have this attraction, the addiction to doing what you know is bad for you. But if there's one thing that's true through all of human history, through the whole world, through 2,000 years ago, through even before that when the first humans sinned, and true today, there's one thing that you can count on 100%, and this is that God will never give up on you. God doesn't quit. When it's hopeless, when you think there's no way out, God doesn't look at it that way. God is always in action, always relentlessly pursuing his kids, his people, you. God doesn't give up. God will never give up on you, because the moment we rebelled there, God put a new plan into action. He wasn't content with just letting us rot. Even if we deserved death, even if we deserved hell, even if we deserved to be separated from him forever, if that was kind of the tactical, that was the measurable, that was what we earned practically. He said, that's not good enough. I love my creation. I love every person that will ever live, that lives today and that has lived in the past, and I want to make a way. And he began a plan. He put a plan in motion to change the world, to save humanity. This was something that he didn't have to do. He could have just wiped us off the face of the earth. He could have just been like, yeah, let's clear the desktop and start fresh, because these guys sucked. This was the worst humanity I've ever made. I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to make the 2.0. But he didn't, because he had a plan. And we catch up in Genesis 3, the first book of the Bible, and it's the first sign of this plan that's into action, God's rescue plan for humanity. And in Genesis 3:15, it says, God is saying kind of to Satan, but Eve is kind of in the room or right around them within earshot hearing this as well. And he says, I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. And if you just kind of read that on island, it seems kind of odd, right? Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, what is God saying here? The fact is, this is the first example of God's plan of rescue. This is him beginning to put the plan into action. It's the foreshadowing of what's to come. And that's a huge theme in the Bible. It's a small chunk of Bible, but it is incredibly significant to human history. And it's more of a threat or really a promise to Satan of what's going to happen in the future. It's a reference of this plan. It's a reference of what God will relentlessly do to pursue you and me at all times. You see, this is the first reference of what the Jewish people called the Messiah, the chosen one who is going to come and make things right, who's going to take the chaos that we created by our rebellion and is going to bring it to peace, to take chaos and make it right into peace with God again. The promise was that somebody from Eve's bloodline was going to be the Messiah, was going to be the chosen one, who was going to reverse the curse, who was going to make things right, who was going to bring that peace to the chaos that we had started. Now, Eve, logically was thinking, hey, this is going to be my kid, right? Like, my offspring is going to be the one that does this. It was me that did this, me and my husband, we did this, and it makes sense that, the redemptive person will be our child and make everything good. Sounds good on paper, but that wasn't what happened, because it took thousands and thousands of years for this to happen. It took thousands of years for the next step to really begin, for the chosen one to come, for the Messiah to come and begin to actually work. The cost was death. We earned it. We deserved it. We contribute to it regularly. And maybe you're sitting there like, Jeff, I've never been to church before. I don't really like being told that I'm bad. Let me ask you an honest question. Have you never in your life contributed to the chaos in the world around you? Have you never made decisions? Have you never contributed by choosing the wrong thing, by lying, by cheating, by stealing, by exaggerating, by being greedy, by not helping the less fortunate? Have you never chosen selfishness over what is best? The fact is we all have fallen into this. We all make this mistake. We are all a part of this. And that's not a statement of judgment on you. That's a statement about society. I don't know anybody who looks at the world right now and is like, yeah, it's all good. Nothing to fix. And I've done nothing to make it the way it is. I'm perfect too. If you are, you're crazy. We're all like that. I'm like that. I've never met a person, sure there's varying degrees of it, but we can all look at the news, look at our own lives, look at our family, and we've all contributed, we've all sinned, we've all made our mark on the world around us. And we all deserve death because of that. And like I said, God could have just thrown us out, said let's start fresh, 2.0 baby, I'm done. But he chose to put that plan into action. And in the meantime, before that Messiah would come thousands of years later, he put kind of a temporary plan into action. In fact, we go back to that conversation I had at the beginning about my friend who was desperately in debt, who could only pay off the interest on his credit card. And that's kind of what he did, because we couldn't pay off the debt. We were kind of completely crushed by the weight of it. He put in this way for us to fill the gap for a period of time. And listen, if there's any vegans in here, anybody who's a card-carrying PETA member, you may want to close your ears or plug your ears or just leave for a second. But the plan for that, for the Jewish people, was an animal sacrifice. The cost was death, and death had to be paid. And so what they did was they set up a system under what's called the Old Covenant, the Old Law. And what they had to do was, for that death to be paid, they would sacrifice an animal. A goat or a sheep or whatever, and they would sacrifice these animals, and that would kind of serve as a debt interest payment. It would hold off the weight of what we deserved. It would hold off the death we deserved, but it was only the interest. There was no way for us to fully pay off that debt. No matter, this sounds morbid, but no matter how many goats you killed, no matter what you did, no matter how hard you prayed, no matter how good of a person you were, that wasn't enough, because it's never been about that. It's about us being able to be with God because we are not in alignment with sin. And because we were rotted out by that, because that became a part of our spiritual DNA, we needed that interest to be paid. But it could only go for so long. Imagine that. Imagine that weight of just, you know what, I can't pay off this debt. I'm kind of under the thumb of it. I know I deserve this. I know it's my own fault, but I can never fully pay it off. And that was what these people were feeling. That's what God's people were feeling all the time. Yeah, we had to go through all these rituals. We had to go through all this kind of what you would call legalism, religion, all these things over and over, and quite gruesome to be honest, in order to pay off that interest. But we could never be free. How would you feel? How do you feel? How hopeless would that make you feel, that the weight of sin is so great that you can never pay it off? You're alive, but you're just really scraping by. Think about it. Again, hopelessness. This story of hope, this story of the Messiah, of the chosen one, it was passed on from generation to generation to generation to generation, to the point where it probably just became more of a legend, a wives' tale than anything to some people. Yeah, you learned it in church, you learned this idea of the Messiah, of the chosen one that was going to come and make everything right, but at some point after a certain amount of hundreds of years, it starts to become a legend more than a truth probably. But they still clung to that. That was the only hope they had, because the reality is the Jewish people, historically and relatively recently, have always had people trying to wipe them off the face of the earth. There's been oppression for God's people over and over and over again, and frankly, the only thing they had to cling to at times was that even though there's this group of people trying to wipe us off the face of the earth, trying to murder us, trying to genocide us, there is going to be the Messiah. There's going to be that person. He's going to come. They're going to come and save us. Yeah, that's the hope that we cling to. And that's all they had. But this was passed on over and over again. And we can see through the Old Testament. And if you have a hard time understanding the Bible, I get it. It's a complex book. It's a multicultural experience. It takes a lot of work. It's a simple truth that it communicates, but it is a very complex book. And there's a lot of learning, and it's actually awesome because there's no lack of depth to what we can experience when we read the Bible, when we learn more about Jesus, when we see what God's plan is for humanity. But the one thing that I want to let you know about the Bible today is that the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, it's all kind of projecting towards Jesus. And then Jesus happens, Jesus comes, and that's the Easter story. And everything after that is projecting Jesus to the world. The story of the church, of you and I today in a post-Jesus, post-Easter world, and what our contribution to that is. But in the first half, after a certain amount of time, it really becomes a lot of prophets, a lot of prophecies. And what's that? That's just people who are speaking for God or telling or hearing God's voice and sharing it with the rest of the world. And we see so many times, like a crazy amount of times in the Old Testament, they're talking about Jesus coming. They're talking about the Messiah. They're saying all these, it's a little bit cryptic, but some are more cryptic than others. Some of them are more obvious. But maybe one of the best examples is a prophet named Isaiah. He has a whole book of the Bible in the Old Testament. I encourage you to check it out. And to actually maybe get a commentary and study it as well, so you can understand it as well as you can, because it can be a little confusing if you don't get some help. But in Isaiah, 700 years before Jesus was born, there's a famous verse called Isaiah 53, and it basically just calls out what Jesus is going to do almost a century later. And I want to take you through that in Isaiah 53. It says, "Who has believed our message? To whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? My servant grew up in the Lord's presence like a tender green shoot, like a root in dry ground. There was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down, and we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's path to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants, that his life was cut short in midstream, but he was struck down for the rebellion of my people. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave. But it was the Lord's good plan to crush him and cause him grief. Yet when his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. He will enjoy a long life, and the Lord's good plan will prosper in his hands. When he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. I will give him the honor of a victorious soldier because he was exposed himself to death. He was counted among the rebels. He bore the sins of many and interceded for rebels. Isaiah 53. It's a lot of scriptures, a lot of Bible right there. But that is one of the most significant prophecies. That is a future telling of what's going to happen, of the most important story that's ever been told. You see, the Jewish people would hear these things and they would know kind of within a certain range that something like that was going to happen. Maybe they didn't have a total understanding. Maybe they would interpret it a little bit off. But they knew that this was happening, and they knew that something along these lines, that in order for the Messiah to come, that he would have to fulfill basically everything that was prophesied. Because if you're promising something, if God is communicating something to people, to humanity, and says this, and this will happen, it has to happen exactly like that, or else it's not true. And the crazy thing about Jesus is as we go through Jesus' life and his story, it fulfills every single prophecy, every promise God told. It doesn't miss a single point. It's all there. Now, we talked about the Jewish people. They were oppressed. You know, to think about in ancient Egypt, they were slaves. So many times they were slaves, actually. They either were slaves or lived under oppression, or people were trying to kill them. There was always an army that wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth. So logically, what were they thinking would be the way that God would save them? They were thinking they were going to get a warrior. They were thinking they were going to get a soldier, somebody who could just rally the troops, who would get people behind them, and they could stage a coup. And at the time when Jesus was born 2,000 years ago, it was the Roman Empire, the powerful, one of the greatest empires the world's ever known, one of the most ruthless empires the world has ever known. So they thought that this Messiah was going to come. They'd be whispering, yeah, Caesar kind of sucks. You know, he steals our money. He doesn't really hide it. They're oppressive, and they don't hide it at all. But that Messiah is going to come. He's going to lay a smackdown on them. He's going to beat up Caesar. He's going to rally the troops. He's going to lead the rebellion, and we're going to take over the most powerful empire that the world has ever known. But they didn't get that. They didn't get that at all. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't a powerful warrior. It wasn't somebody with a sword and a shield or an arrow and a bow. They got a baby born in a cave. It's like a young mom, a virgin, who grew up to be a carpenter, who was kind of like, if you just saw him, was nothing special. That's what Isaiah said. There's nothing special about him. There's nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. He's just an average guy. So with average parents, who was born in a cave, like I said. Like, there was nothing about his life from the moment he was born that was like royalty or God. Something you would expect God on earth to be, the chosen one to save the day. He was fully human. He was fully God. God on earth came in the most humble way possible, the most meek way possible, the complete polar opposite of what everybody thought he was going to be. Now, if we look at the Bible in the first 4 books in the New Testament, those are called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You can go right to the middle there, you can find it. It's basically a first-person account of Jesus' life by the people that lived with him and saw him. It's a highlight reel of Jesus' life, and I encourage you, if you haven't read the Bible, you can pull out your Bible app and just start right there in the Gospels, and that will be a great place to see what Jesus is doing and what he's done and who he is. But what you'll see at that time is legalism, even in the Jewish community, in the Jewish religion, and in the Jewish, just the leadership there at the time. Under the Roman law, the Jewish people were allowed to practice their faith, but they weren't allowed to have a king above Caesar. So they could kind of exist. They were allowed to go to, to have their temple. They could do sorts of things, but they were really oppressed and weren't totally free in what they could do. But the Jewish leaders kind of got carried away. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, all these kind of religious leaders, they became cocky, they became arrogant, they started to become more focused on the things that weren't that important. They started majoring in the minors, and they became more about puffing their chest and showing everybody how religious they were, how they followed all the rules very specifically to the letter of the law. And they wanted everyone to hear it. They did it loudly and projected it because it was a point of pride for them, because they thought they were better people, that they would be respected, and they should be respected because of their legalism, because they do everything so much further than even they were supposed to, and they would call out other people and make them feel like they were less and tell them they were less because they didn't achieve that same standard. It wasn't about relationship with God. It was about projecting to other people, look how great I am, look how spiritual I am, look how good of a person I am. It was about their actions, not about their heart. And this was something that was continually becoming this break from what God actually wanted from people. So enters Jesus. Jesus comes in, and if you look at these first 4 books of the Bible, Jesus is just going out healing people, blind people, giving them sight. He's doing miracles. He's curing leprosy, something that was incurable at the time. He did things that were scientifically impossible because he was God. He wielded the power over nature, over science, over physics. He could break the laws of science because he was God. And beyond just power, he would go to the people that didn't ever get to be with people. Lepers, prostitutes, people that were abandoned, that were the societal outcasts. And he would show them love. And he showed us in those Gospels, he showed us the way to live. The perfect way to live. The perfect life. The standard, the gold standard for how you and I should be living. And this didn't sit well with the religious leaders because they were having this power. Their power was slipping through their fingers like sand through your hand. And they're like, man, we got to get control of this because we're going to lose all of our power, which is the total opposite of what people of God should do. But they were so corrupted that they began a plan to try and gain control again. And that plan was to kill Jesus. We have to kill him. We're going to lose control. This person, it's spiraling out of control. Jesus is such a problem that we have to murder him. So how do we do that? Because we actually can't get him on anything, any laws, because he hasn't broken any laws. He hasn't sinned. He's never done anything wrong. He's never broken a legal law. He's never broken a law of God. He has never sinned in any way. So we can't just haul him out to court and get him on anything. We've been watching him forever. They tried over and over to catch him, and he would just navigate it perfectly. So they're like, we got to do something. So they kind of tricked the system. They decided to go to the Roman guard authorities and tell them that he was starting a rebellion and that they needed to kill him. And really what ended up happening was even the Romans had nothing to do with it, and they admitted that, but they were scared of this uprising of all these people. So in order to just kind of appease everyone, they're like, let's kill him. Let's just do it. Let's go for it. Let's end it. It's just not worth it. Let's just wipe the slate clean. It's just one person, whatever. We'll just have him killed. So the religious leaders went and they had one of his best friends, his disciples, his closest followers, Judas, turned on him for just a couple months' worth of salary, just a few silver coins, really nothing in comparison to a relationship with a close friend, let alone God. And he was turned in, and he was tortured. He was beaten to the point where he was unrecognizable. He had to carry his own cross, to the point where historians say that he was beaten so badly that most people would have just died from the beating. But then he picked up this heavy piece of wood, really just two trees sewn together, tied together, and carried it knowing that he was going to be tortured. And maybe you've never understood what a cross does before. It's not like just something you put on your neck. It's not just something for a tattoo. It's one of the most gruesome torture devices in all of human history, because you don't just die from the blood that comes out of you. Like nails through your feet, nails through your hands, yeah, that sucks for sure. But you don't die from that. You actually suffocate. Your weight of your body, you have to push up on the nails just to get another breath. And then hunker down, you lose more energy, and to breathe again, you have to push up on the nails. And it's not just death, it's pain, it's torture. And he had to do this after he was beaten, after he was mocked, after he was screamed at by the religious leaders, by passerbys, by criminals. They chirped him, and all they would do is throw insults, hurl them at him. He was mocked for saying he's the king of the Jews because he's God, and they fashioned a crown for him as king out of thorns. And not just like raspberry bushes, like these were some thorns with some real pointy, long parts on them, and it would have pierced into his skull. And he had to have that as another example of the mockery of him. He had done nothing wrong. This was the absolute greatest injustice in human history. This is crazy. This is absurd. If today we knew, you want to talk about justice, this was not justice. This should have caused an uprising for every person that saw it, because it was so clearly wrong. But everyone just stood by. Just like Isaiah said, everyone just stood there as he was slowly tortured to death, as he was beaten and mocked, as he pushed up on nails through his feet and hands just to be able to breathe again. Just like Isaiah predicted. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as the sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth, unjustly condemned. And then Jesus died. He died. God on earth died. And I can only imagine how hopeless his followers felt. And for 3 days, it was the darkest moment in human history. And I want you to just really think about this, because I don't think I even always grasp it. This isn't a story. This isn't a fairy tale. This happened in this planet. This happened in real time, just as real as we're in this space, just as real as you're watching at home or listening at home. In real life, this happened. God came to earth, was tortured, and died. And for 3 days, there was darkness. Think of the hopelessness. There's nothing more hopeless than that. You're talking about having credit card debt. God, who came to rescue us from our sin that we deserved and could never pay off on our own, is dead for 3 days. And it would seem as though evil had won. God's rescue plan had failed, the debt was too heavy, and this began that dark season. God was dead and humanity lost. But like I said, there's one truth that has echoed through history that was true then, that is true now, and will always be true. And that's that God never gives up on you. God will never give up on us. And God is in control. Even when it seems like darkness wins, God is always in control. And God is in control of your life, your circumstance, whatever you're walking through that seems hopeless, like darkness is winning. God is always in control, and he can pull you out of it. Even for people that thought that Jesus was gone, even the most unlikely, like the final note of hopelessness wasn't enough, because God never gives up on any of us. Because 3 days later, Jesus rose from the dead. He defied death. Not only defied death, he walked out of his grave. The stone was moved out. It was a cave with a big stone in front of it. And he defined that moment by rising above the death that he accepted. He defeated it. And he didn't just beat death. He now owned death. He had the keys to death. He is the one that controls all of that. You see, Jesus had a supernatural birth from a virgin. The story of Christmas. It was a supernatural conception. It was a supernatural birth. And because of that, that addiction, the non-biological passing down of the sin nature that we have, he wasn't owned by that. Now, don't get me wrong. He was still tempted. He would have the opportunity. He would have felt every temptation you've ever felt. The difference between you, me, and him is that he just never said yes. He never fell into that. He never gave in. He was perfect. And because of that, he didn't have the same deal as us. He didn't have to die. He didn't have to accept that debt of death. He didn't have to have that punishment. He could have chosen to live forever. But he knew that there was a rescue plan. He knew his purpose. He knew his mission. And that was to save us all. That was to take you in all of your wretchedness, me in all of my brokenness and my rottenness, and all the mistakes I've ever made and ever will make. The things that I've done by accident, the things that I've chosen on purpose, the things that I've just frankly rebelled against God for, rebelled against my family, rebelled against truth and what is good. And he knew that he had to step into that space, and he had to clear the plate, clear the table. He was the only one who could do it, because he knew that we couldn't. So even though he was terrified, even though he was scared, and he knew that he was going to be tortured and suffering, it wasn't like he could turn his God blinders on and just turn off his nervous system and feel it. He could have, but he refused to, because he knew he had to do what he had to do to rescue us. And not just all of us. He would have done it for just you. Can comprehend, I say this as often as I can when I'm up here. I can comprehend giving my life. I don't want to, don't call me out on it, probably, but I can comprehend one person giving their entire life to save this whole room, let alone the entire world. But what I can't comprehend is giving your life and suffering like that just for one person who maybe you don't even meet in person. He gave it for you in all the mistakes you've made and all the times you look in the mirror. Every time you look in the mirror and you feel dirty, you feel broken, you remember the things that you've done, you feel like you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not good looking enough. He sees you for who you are, worthy of dying for. This isn't made up religion, friends. This is truth. This is who you are. This is who God sees you as. This is why Jesus was willing to die for you and did. He rose from the grave and he defeated death so you could have freedom from the debt that you couldn't break yourself. He didn't have to die, but he did, because he loves you, because he sees what you're capable of, because you're valuable, because you're loved. And no matter what words have been spoken over you, no matter what a teacher, a friend, a parent, I don't care who it is, whatever somebody's been telling you that you're not good enough or you're not valuable, listen. They don't know what they're talking about, because Jesus saw you. He knew who you would be. He was on the cross thinking of you today, 2,000 years later, even in your mistakes. He said, this is worth it. Every lashing, every whip, every beating, every thorn in his skull was worth it, because he loves you and you're worth it. When Isaiah said, when he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he'll be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, and he will bear their sins. This was 700 years before, and it came to be true. And now, where hopelessness and chaos trapped us, we're now marked by Jesus. by our mistakes defined us. We're now defined by God on earth, who died on the cross for us. Where society and other people would say you're unredeemable, Jesus says you have been rescued, and you don't have to be defined by that anymore. Where we deserve death, Jesus took our weakness and he replaced it with his strength. Jesus did what only he could do because Jesus is God. John 14:6, it's a famous verse. Jesus said, I am the way, I'm the truth, and I'm the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. He's the bridge. He's the way to peace. He's the way out of chaos. Jesus is the only way. Society will tell you that there's 1,000 ways. Jesus says, I am the only way. There is only one way, and that's not because he's overconfident. It's not because he doesn't love you or the world. It's because it's the truth, and there's only one way, and he doesn't give us another option. And you can sit there and be like, man, well, I don't like that there's not multiple roads to the same place. I'm not super big fan. If I would have done it, I would have done it so everybody can do however they want. You're not God. Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, and no one comes to the Father. Let's focus on what the truth is. There's a way. And it's a hard road because you have to follow Jesus, and that's not in alignment with society all the time. You have to kind of navigate. You have to say no to sin. You don't get to just do anything you want. But let's focus in on the good news, friends, that Jesus made a way. And there is a way out of your chaos. There's a way to peace. There's a way out of your wretchedness. And there is a God who loved you enough to die for you and still looks at you and says, you're so worth it. And maybe you've never thought about that before. Or maybe you used to believe it and it's been a long time. You ran from it. Maybe you just kind of got lost in the narrative. You've been going to church over and over and over again. You come, but kind of there's cobwebs in your soul. It's collecting dust. It's been a long time since you accepted this, not just knew it, but you felt it. You recognized it and let it take hold of your heart and change the way you view the world around you and view yourself when you look in the mirror. If that's you, tonight is the first opportunity. It's an opportunity to step up. It's an opportunity to actually embrace Jesus, embrace truth, embrace peace, to not just be okay with just getting by, but to have the weight off your back because you don't have to carry it anymore because Jesus died for you and he loves you. Easter is not just about turkey or ham or Easter eggs. That's family. It's all good stuff. But Easter is about freedom from the weight and debt that we can't get rid of ourselves. And it doesn't matter how deep you're into sin. It doesn't matter how deep you're into addiction. It doesn't matter how bad your porn addiction is. It doesn't matter how many relationships you've been in. It doesn't matter how much sex you've had. It doesn't matter how much you've lied, cheated, stealed. It doesn't matter. Jesus stands there and says, listen, I know who you've been. That wasn't good. But I know who you can be. I know who you are. And it's worth it. If I had to die for you again, I'd do it all over again because you are worth it. Tonight you have the opportunity to accept that. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the 100th time, maybe you're coming back to what you once knew was true. But I want you to know this, you're never too far. Anyone here has the opportunity to get realigned with that, to embrace truth, to embrace peace, to embrace Jesus. So in just a second, we're going to take an opportunity for everyone here to kind of put that into action. If you look, we have some people who are going to come up. There's a couple of crosses on the side. They're going to put them up front here. We have pieces of paper that were handed to you when you came in, paper and pens or pencils. And I want you to think of what you've been holding on to. What weight you've been carrying, what debt you've been carrying that you need Jesus to take from you. Addiction, relationships. Maybe it's not even a sin that you've been carrying. Maybe it's things you've believed, things that someone said to you, lies that were told to you that you've let be your identity. Your identity needs to be in Jesus, not in the words of other people. That's where freedom comes from. You don't have to write your name. I encourage you actually don't write your name. Just write what you're given to God. We've got some tables at the back. We're going to have lights kind of lighting them up. You can't miss them. If you didn't get a pen or paper, you can walk back there and grab one, fill it out. Then come to the front, and there's some tacks kind of here and there, and just pin it on the cross as the band plays. Take a moment. This is a physical representation of something that's happening in your heart. It's not just pinning a piece of paper on a cross. It's symbolically saying, Jesus, I don't need this anymore. The thing that I've let define me, the words that I've let define me, the self-harm that has been in my head, in my heart, or in my actions, the things that are destructive, those don't define me. I choose to follow you. I choose to put my focus to you. I accept the debt is paid, and I want to walk in freedom. Pin it on there. Jesus took it. You don't carry it anymore. It stays on the cross. It doesn't go back to your seat. It doesn't go back to your home. It doesn't go back to your school. It doesn't go back to your work. You are no longer defined by those. Jesus took it. Jesus defines you. The debt is paid. You're free.